Greetings, and welcome to a special edition of Boring Tales, focused on uncovering the disturbing secrets of the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. If you're searching for a soothing yet intellectually stimulating historical narrative to guide you toward a peaceful night's sleep, your search ends here. Before we commence our travel through the annals of time, I'm curious to learn where you're tuning in from, and what the time is in your corner of the globe at this moment. Don't hesitate to post a comment and say hello. Also, if you value this kind of tranquil, enlightening material, please press the subscribe button so that you are always alerted about future installments. Very well, shall we paint a picture of our setting? Envision a realm defined by golden sands, fertile riverbanks, and colossal temples and burial sites that seem to scrape the brilliant azure heavens. This was a society that persisted for more than 3 millennia, etching a permanent legacy upon the tapestry of human existence. At its very heart were the pharaohs, the deified sovereigns who commanded incredible authority and status. Yet, beneath the shimmering veneer of immense wealth and royal ceremony, the existence of these god-kings was frequently saturated with darkness, obsession, and startling customs that can be quite challenging for us to comprehend in the modern era. Over the course of the next hour, we will be delving deeply into the captivating and often unsettling domain of ancient Egypt's pharaohs as we continue uncovering the disturbing secrets of their lives. We will investigate their lavish daily routines within the confines of sprawling palace grounds, their intricate networks of royal connections and intense rivalries, and their resolute conviction in their own divinity. We shall also address the pharaohs' fixation on mortality and the afterlife, a preoccupation that compelled them to build progressively more intricate tombs and funerary temples, and even prompted some to participate in the horrifying custom of human sacrifice. By the conclusion of our exploration, we will have met significant personalities like Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, King Tut, and Ramesses II, and followed the enthralling enigmas modern-day archaeologists are yet unraveling about their lives and times. This is a saga of might, mysticism, obsession, and timeless legacies that have captivated the world for many centuries. So, lower the lighting, get comfortable, and allow the machinations of ancient Egypt to gently transport you upon the currents of history. However, before we can completely submerge ourselves in the ancient past, we should first zoom out to observe the ancient Egyptian civilization at its pinnacle. Extending from approximately 3100 BCE until 30 BCE, ancient Egypt stood as one of the initial and most enduringly complex civilizations in all of human history. This kingdom was established when King Menes consolidated the scattered communities of the fertile Nile Valley into a unified nation, capitalizing on the river's rich floodplains to ignite an agricultural boom that was the absolute envy of the entire ancient world. Over the passing millennia, Egypt flourished into a major center for riches, art, and power, its territories reaching from the Mediterranean Sea far south into Nubia. The pharaohs governed a centralized nation with an advanced administrative system, revolutionary technological developments such as the ox-pulled plow and sailboats, alongside a vibrant culture that created ageless pieces of art, magnificent architecture, and profound literature. The Egyptians created one of the globe's earliest writing methods, known as hieroglyphics, in addition to a 365-day calendar which followed the yearly rising of the Nile with remarkable accuracy. But maybe their most prominent and lasting accomplishments were the enormous structures they created. The Great Pyramids, vast temple grounds, and underground tombs carved directly into rock faces. These truly awe-inspiring acts of engineering helped to display the godlike authority and renown of the pharaohs, while simultaneously suggesting the profoundness of their fixation on mortality and the eternal. For the pharaohs, this mortal existence was just a precursor to a magnificent and well-stocked immortality, and they would commit immense wealth and human effort to guaranteeing their portion of forever. At the very core of this incredible civilization were the pharaohs themselves, the deified monarchs who governed as the living manifestation of the god Horus upon the earth. The pharaoh was the ultimate power in all areas of governance, faith, and military matters, possessing a degree of power and sway that is almost beyond our comprehension today. He, or in very rare instances she, was tasked with preserving order and harmony throughout the cosmos, appeasing the gods with ceremonies and valuable offerings, and guaranteeing the well-being and security of the Egyptian populace. But this incredibly high standing came with a sinister aspect too, as we are about to learn. The pharaohs were ensnared within an elaborate and frequently merciless web of ceremonies, beliefs, and duties that dictated every single part of their lives and eventual deaths. From the incestuous unions they entered into to preserve the purity of the royal bloodline, to the loyal servants and cherished pets they took with them to their graves, to the truly shocking acts of self-deification and human sacrifice that some pharaohs took part in, the lives of these divine rulers were often as filled with profound darkness as they were with brilliant light. So as we venture forth to examine the intimate lives and enduring influence of some of history's most renowned and powerful rulers, prepare yourself for an expedition into the fascinating, alluring, and periodically disturbing realm of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Let's start now by picturing a day in the existence of a pharaoh at the zenith of the New Kingdom, around 1500 BCE. The sun rises softly over the gleaming limestone exteriors of the pharaoh's expansive palace grounds at Thebes. The monarch and his retinue are awakened from their slumber by the gentle melodies of blind musicians welcoming the dawn, as servants with bare feet move quietly through halls lit by torches, carrying platters of food to end the royal fast. In the palace's columned courtyards, songbirds dart through verdant gardens and bubbling fountains, while domesticated baboons and young lions rest in the cool shadows. The pharaoh steps out from his sleeping quarters, followed by a retinue of personal attendants who just spent the last hour on his complex grooming routine. They've shaved his head and body perfectly smooth to prevent lice, outlined his eyes with dramatic kohl and green malachite, and applied scented oils and perfumes to his limbs. Gold and electrum shine at his neck and wrists, while a beautiful crown shaped like a falcon adorns his forehead, a representation of his divine connection to the god Horus. Thus adorned in all his splendor, the living deity walks out to start his full day of official tasks and religious observances. First on his schedule is a trip to the palace sanctuary to present offerings and pour libations to the main gods: Re, the sun god; Osiris, the god of the afterlife; and the pharaoh's own deified forebears. Chanting priests make the incense-scented air thick with hymns and prayers as the king prostrates himself before the calm, painted faces of the deities. With his religious duties fulfilled, the pharaoh calls his council to listen to requests, deliver rulings, and deliberate on matters of the kingdom. Seated upon a golden throne, he hears his vizier announce the day's agenda: land disputes to resolve, commercial pacts to finalize, and building works to supervise. Though he seeks counsel from his most loyal courtiers, the ultimate decision on every issue rests solely with him. The day continues in a flurry of rituals and displays intended to impress the public and affirm the pharaoh's sacred right to govern. The monarch parades through the town in a splendid chariot, the acclamations of his people swelling like a tide as he bestows upon them presents of gold and food. He presides over the ceremonial start of a new temple, hammering in the initial stake with a golden mallet while priests recite spells to consecrate the holy ground. Yet even during these moments of public success, an undercurrent of dark belief and obsessive ceremony flows beneath the proceedings. The pharaoh is cautious to always step into a chamber with his right foot first to protect against malevolent spirits. He dines using only his left hand, keeping his right for communicating with the god. And he absolutely never, ever lets his shadow touch a priest or a divine statue, lest he provoke a divine fury that could destroy the kingdom. As Re's brilliant disk descends slowly toward the western skyline, the pharaoh retreats to his personal chambers for a few precious instances of leisure before the nightly feast. Dancing women sway with fluid grace to the melodies of harps and lyres, while the monarch sips date wine from a golden chalice and discusses the intricacies of theology with his advisors. But even at ease, the thought of mortality and the eternal is never distant from his thoughts. For the pharaoh is aware that this worldly existence, no matter how luxurious and godlike, is merely a brief illusion compared to the magnificent forever that awaits him in the field of reeds. That is why he has already invested immense wealth into his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a concealed necropolis where he will rule in splendor for all time. But first, he must navigate the complex web of duties and risks that accompanies wearing the double crown. And nowhere are those dangers more immediate than within his own royal court. From the moment he takes the throne, one of the pharaoh's most urgent responsibilities is to guarantee the succession by having a male successor. However, in the incestuous pressure cooker of the royal family, where pharaohs commonly married their own siblings and sometimes their children to preserve the bloodline, the struggle for power and sway is constantly simmering right below the ornate surface. The king's great royal wife might be his own half-sister, but that does not deter her from conspiring with priests and officials to promote her own son's right to the throne over that of his senior half-brother. Indeed, the annals of Egyptian history are filled with accounts of palace intrigue, competing queens, and merciless power struggles between potential successors. Consider the incredible story of Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh who seized power and ruled as a king in her own right for 2 decades during the 15th century BCE. Initially, she was only a regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, but Hatshepsut methodically consolidated her authority, adopting every masculine symbol of kingship, even portraying herself with a false beard in official images. Then there is the shocking tale of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who completely overturned centuries of religious custom by declaring the sun disk Aten as the one true deity and forbidding the veneration of all others. In his fanatical devotion, Akhenaten even altered his own name from Amenhotep IV to signify his loyalty to Aten, relocated the capital city to a desolate desert location, and ruthlessly oppressed the influential priesthood of Ammonius. His entire reign was consumed by courtly conspiracies, ultimately ending in total disaster, leaving his young son Tutankhamun to deal with the chaotic aftermath. But perhaps the most chilling example of how a pharaoh's absolute, godlike power could be hideously abused is the custom of human sacrifice that was once alarmingly widespread in ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous so-called retainer sacrifices within the tombs of early monarchs like Jur and Jet, where dozens of attendants were brutally slaughtered to continue serving their ruler in the afterlife. Even more terrifyingly, certain pharaohs like Horaha were interred with their cherished pets and worldly riches, along with great piles of human hair wigs, which were likely shorn from the heads of sacrificial victims. Thankfully, this truly ghastly practice appears to have vanished by the conclusion of the Old Kingdom, as the Egyptians conceived of more symbolic methods for pharaohs to bring their earthly companions with them to the next life. but it absolutely remains a dark stain upon the otherwise brilliant legacy of the Pharaohs, a stark reminder of the unimaginable chasm that separated these divine sovereigns from the teeming masses they ruled over. As the millennia rolled by, the Pharaohs kept on shaping the trajectory of Egyptian history, leaving their imprint in both stone and legend. Some, such as Ramesses II, famously known as Ramesses the Great, governed the kingdom at the absolute zenith of its authority and magnificence, their great triumphs and passionate love affairs immortalized upon the walls of the temples they raised to their own everlasting glory. Others, like the legendary Cleopatra VII, found themselves caught in the high-stakes machinations of the greater Mediterranean world, their personal magnetism and political cunning becoming the material of timeless legend. Yet it's possible no pharaoh has ever seized the modern imagination quite like the boy king Tutankhamun, whose magnificent tomb's discovery in 1922 triggered a global wave of Tut-mania and transformed the once-forgotten ruler into a household name. The breathtaking treasures unearthed from Tut's tomb, from his iconic golden burial mask to the layered coffins and thrones, gave us an unparalleled look into the sheer opulence and artistry of a royal funeral and forever cemented the pharaoh's reputation as the ultimate symbols of status in the ancient world. Today, new archaeological findings and sophisticated scientific methods are enabling us to look even more closely into the lives and demises of these endlessly captivating sovereigns. CT scans and DNA research have uncovered the inbred genetic flaws that afflicted Tut's lineage, as well as the infected injuries and malaria that probably took his life at the young age of 19. Inscriptions and papyrus scrolls provide an increasingly detailed account of the ruthless world of court politics, where foreign concubines and plotting viziers competed for power in the shadow of the throne. And yet, for all the dark secrets and unsettling customs we have found about the pharaohs, their shining legacy as some of the most famous and lasting rulers in human history is intact. For over 3,000 years, they governed a civilization of incredible accomplishments and advancements, from the geometric exactness of the pyramids to the medical expertise of the world's first neurosurgery. They commissioned some of the most beautiful and timeless pieces of art and buildings ever made, from the calm elegance of Nefertiti's limestone sculpture to the immense grandeur of the colossi of Memnon. And they continue to ignite our minds and stir our sense of awe, asking us to ponder the riddles of absolute authority and consider what it signifies to strive for immortality when faced with the transient nature of human existence. So, the next occasion you find yourself looking up at the mysterious face of the Sphinx or admiring the golden magnificence of Tutankhamun's funerary mask, take some time to think about the pharaohs who once held godlike authority over the lives of millions. Theirs is a narrative of stunning successes and shocking wrongdoings, towering structures and terrifying body counts, incredible riches and existential fear in the face of the eternal. It is a narrative that speaks to the peaks of human accomplishment and the lows of our potential for brutality, the unyielding desire for immortality, and the unavoidable truth of death. And it is a narrative that will persist in enthralling us as long as the ancient stones of ancient Egypt hold their mysteries close, welcoming each new era to solve anew the endlessly compelling riddle of the pharaohs. And with that, we have come to the conclusion of our quick tour through the disturbing and brilliant lives of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. I trust you've appreciated this deep exploration into one of history's most renowned and powerful civilizations, and that the tales of these extraordinary rulers have offered some deep material for reflection as you fall asleep. As always, thank you so much for tuning in to Boring Tales and for dedicating a part of your day to examining the endlessly captivating details and aspects of our collective human narrative. If you have appreciated this immersive journey into the distant past, I would be very happy if you could click that subscribe button and post a comment expressing your opinions on the Pharaohs and their extensive legacy. Until we meet again, pleasant dreams, and may your reveries be filled with the brilliant light of the eternal sun disk, the green reeds of the field of reeds, and the hushed secrets of the kings and queens who once governed as living deities over the gleaming sands of ancient Egypt. As we have observed, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt experienced lives of wealth and magnificence almost beyond comprehension today. Yet, behind the shimmering veneer of gold and deities existed a more somber truth, one of an absolute authority, mystical fixations, and the constant presence of mortality. Perhaps no pharaoh represented these paradoxes more than Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great. Taking the throne around 1279 BC, Ramesses would govern for a remarkable 66 years, one of the lengthiest reigns in all of Egyptian history. He led an age of immense prosperity and initiated a huge construction program, putting up temples, obelisks, and sculptures throughout the kingdom. The sheer size and splendor of these structures were intended to impress his people and declare his divine authority for all time. But Ramesses II's desire for fame and eternal life was limitless. He sired more than 100 offspring with a large harem of spouses and mistresses. He was quick to alter or completely demolish the temples and structures of past rulers, substituting their names and likenesses with his own in a bold display of self-promotion. Even the huge statues he had made of himself, some reaching over 80 feet in height, were acts of deified self-love and aggrandizement. Yet, perhaps most unsettling were the steps Ramesses took to guarantee his own afterlife. His large tomb complex, the Ramesseum, featured a massive funerary temple, maintained by a whole town of priests, craftsmen, and slaves. Ramesses spared no cost in outfitting his final resting place, filling it with incredible riches. Golden chariots, fine furniture, intricately decorated alabaster jars. Even his cherished pet lion was preserved to go with him. However, Ramesses did not end his preparations there. Recent archaeological work indicates that many of the pharaoh's personal attendants, including his concubines, were ceremonially killed upon his passing so they could keep on serving him in the next life. The bones of these individuals present a disturbing scene, their bodies positioned as if they were still attending to their ruler, now a perpetually divine monarch. It is a chilling testament to how far ancient Egyptian sovereigns were prepared to go in their pursuit of immortality and godlike authority. Ramesses II may have ruled during a golden era, but he also misused countless thousands for his own self-importance and beliefs of godhood. The blood and toil of ordinary people quite literally forged his legacy. While Ramesses the Great was a particularly flagrant case, he was by no means the only pharaoh to misuse his absolute authority in such ways. His predecessors, Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, initiated similarly grand and self-serving construction endeavors. The young king Tutankhamun was buried with a breathtaking collection of invaluable treasures, while Cleopatra ruthlessly got rid of her own siblings to guarantee her sole command of the throne. Time after time, the pharaohs demonstrated that their deified rank put them beyond the ethical rules that applied to common Egyptians. They could overturn religious customs at will, have numerous sexual partners, confiscate land and labor, and even formalize murder, all without any repercussions. The prospect of a magnificent afterlife made grandiose excess not merely permissible but almost certain. But in the end, the pharaohs learned what all despots must, that no human, regardless of how powerful, can evade mortality. For all their shrines and burial sites, magical incantations, and sacrificial attendants, they met the same end as the most lowly commoner. Their preserved bodies and worldly goods collected dust in the shadows, while their kingdom fell and their deities were forgotten. The cautionary story of the Pharaohs still holds meaning in our contemporary era of would-be strongmen and self-proclaimed demigods. Those who think they are above the usual constraints of ethics and mortality should reflect on how the most powerful rulers of ancient Egypt came to their dishonorable ends. For the great leveler comes for kings and commoners alike, a humbling lesson 3,000 years in the telling. Excellent, the next part of the script has been received. I will continue the rewriting and rephrasing process, applying the same rules as before. A natural, human-written style, an emphasis on the disturbing secrets theme, and matching the original word count precisely. As we conclude this section on uncovering the disturbing secrets of ancient Egypt's god-kings, it's impossible not to be struck by how much has been lost to the relentless desert sands. While we have certainly unearthed their riches and unraveled some of their mysteries, a vast amount remains hidden about this fascinating civilization that created marvels while operating beyond moral limits. It's possible that as archaeologists continue to peel back the layers of time, we will gain an even sharper picture of the darkness behind the pharaoh's brilliant reign, a more profound insight into what drove these deified sovereigns to such pinnacles of authority and abysses of corrupting self-obsession. Until that day, they will forever stalk our imaginations, magnificent and sphinx-like, draped in gold and enigma. We can only speculate about what other horrifying truths are still concealed within the Valley of the Kings, awaiting their moment to emerge into the light once more. Stories of despots and god-kings now turned to dust but forever carved in eternity, a powerful testament that even the most magnificent empires and most revered of sovereigns cannot evade the unstoppable march of time. So, as you drift toward slumber, your mind full of golden sarcophagi and ghostly whispers, let's contemplate the persistent fascination of these ancient monarchs who held the forces of life and death, heaven and earth, within their pampered hands. And let's be grateful, maybe, that beings like them will never again walk this world. Divine, decadent, and ultimately ruined by their own colossal egos. The following morning would find the pharaoh commencing his daily schedule of sacred obligations and state governance. He would first immerse himself in a holy basin or be purified with consecrated water by religious officials, a ceremony believed to cleanse both his physical and spiritual self. The pharaoh was subsequently attired in the most exquisite linens, decorated with monarchical symbols like the double crown, scepter, and shepherd's crook. Each object carried profound significance. The crook signifying his duty as the guardian of his people, the flail his power to discipline Egypt's foes. But even these ordinary morning activities were filled with layers of mystical obligation. Every single movement was akin to a meticulously planned dance, directed by the stringent principles of Ma'at, the cosmic harmony that kept the universe in balance. To stray even a little from these sacred procedures was to invite disorder and face the god's fury. It was a substantial, existential weight to carry, but one regarded as absolutely crucial for a living deity. Once dressed in his sacred attire, the pharaoh would step out from the palace to start his full schedule. Often, the first task was a trip to the temple to present offerings to the deities and carry out essential ceremonies. As the chief priest of every shrine, his duty was to please the gods and guarantee their ongoing blessings for Egypt. He would provide offerings, say sacred spells, and light incense for the cult images in the temple sanctuary. Regardless of how boring, each ceremony had to be done with absolute accuracy, like tending to a cosmic mechanism. Even the smallest error could lead to disastrous result. The well-known pyramid texts, inscribed on the interiors of royal tombs, were essentially a guide for the pharaoh to use in the afterlife, leading him through the challenges to get to the blessed field of reeds. One can only guess the immense strain and worry of needing to perform the ceremonies perfectly, with the greatest conceivable consequences at stake. With his religious responsibilities finished, the pharaoh would shift to the task of ruling Egypt. He would convene with his most loyal advisors, viziers who served as his representatives throughout the kingdom. They presented updates on the political state in Egypt and its foreign relations with adversaries like the Nubians, Hittites, and Mesopotamians. The pharaoh would listen to requests from his subjects and issue his rulings based on Ma'at. Although the viziers managed the extensive state administration on a daily basis, the pharaoh had the ultimate authority on all issues and was required to maintain justice. Governing a huge nation was difficult enough, but the pharaoh's unfettered, absolute power created its own unsettling motivations. With no effective limit on his desires, a pharaoh could readily fall into corruption or despotism if he chose. Some pharaohs levied harsh taxes and conscripted labor from their people to construct their own grand monuments. Others became suspicious and engaged in merciless purges of anyone they saw as a danger. The Ptolemaic pharaoh Ptolemy IV Philopator had his own mother and brother killed to remove possible competitors for the throne. With ultimate control over life and death, the bonds of family would often turn lethal. But the pharaoh's day wasn't all plotting and piety. He was also permitted to experience the best worldly delights and recreational activity. He might embark on a hunting trip in the arid lands, shooting arrows from his war chariot at escaping lions and antelopes. The hunt was viewed as a representation of the pharaoh's victory over the forces of disorder that perpetually endangered Egypt. A successful hunt demonstrated his strength and skill as a warrior. The pharaoh might also play a board game of Senet with one of his close advisors. Senet was extremely well liked among the Egyptian upper class and even acquired spiritual importance. Some thought the game mirrored the soul's passage through the Duat underworld, with the final spaces signifying the entrances to the afterlife. Here, too, the distinctions between worldly leisure and cosmic meaning were consistently indistinct. As Re's passage across the heavens neared its end and the shadows grew longer, the pharaoh would at last retreat to his personal rooms for a few precious instances of leisure before the nightly feast. But even at ease, the thought of mortality and the eternal is never distant from his thoughts. For the pharaoh is aware that this worldly existence, no matter how luxurious and godlike, is merely a brief illusion compared to the magnificent forever that awaits him in the field of reeds. That is why he has already invested immense wealth into his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a concealed necropolis where he will rule in splendor for all time. But first, he must navigate the complex web of duties and risks that accompanies wearing the double crown. And nowhere are those dangers more immediate than within his own royal court. From the moment he takes the throne, one of the pharaoh's most urgent responsibilities is to guarantee the succession by having a male successor. However, in the incestuous pressure cooker of the royal family, where pharaohs commonly married their own siblings and sometimes their children to preserve the bloodline, the struggle for power and sway is constantly simmering right below the ornate surface. The king's great royal wife might be his own half-sister, but that does not deter her from conspiring with priests and officials to promote her own son's right to the throne over that of his senior half-brother. Indeed, the annals of Egyptian history are filled with accounts of palace intrigue, competing queens, and merciless power struggles between potential successors. As Re's journey across the sky drew to a close and shadows lengthened, the pharaoh would finally retire to his private quarters for a few snatched moments of relaxation before the evening banquet. But even in rest, his divine duties never ceased. The pharaoh's sleep was believed to mystically merge his Ba soul with the sun god, renewing his divine life force. It was a time of strange visions and communion with the gods, not mere repose. Enigmatic dream books have survived that were used to help interpret the pharaoh's dreams and discern divine messages in them. In one disturbing dream from the Chester Beatty Papyrus, the pharaoh Ramesses II dreamt he saw Ptah, the great creator god of Memphis, standing over him with a sword. Ptah angrily chastised him for not completing his temple and struck him on his side. When Ramesses awoke, he was determined to appease the wrathful deity by expediting work on the temple. Even in his own dreams, it seemed, there was no refuge from the crushing pressure of his role. The pharaoh's waking hours may have passed according to strict ritual and protocol, but his sleeping mind was an untamed landscape where deities and demons roamed freely. The same potent magic he wielded by day held sway in this nocturnal realm, for good or ill. Spells were carved on headrests and bed frames to protect the vulnerable sleeper from malign forces. This liminal space between waking and dreaming was a potent time for communing with the unseen and for divining the gods' muriel wills. The life of a pharaoh, from sun up to sundown, was a tightrope walk between the earthly and divine, the banal and sublime. Every action, no matter how routine, took on transcendent significance in a world pulsing with magic and portent. There could be no real distinction between sacred and profane. That pervasive aura of mysticism and symbolism infused the pharaoh's day-to-day existence, but also justified the absolute power he wielded. By upholding Ma'at in the material realm, the pharaoh sustained the proper order that kept the cosmos from dissolving into oblivion. But that same power also enabled the darkest impulses and excesses of human nature. The challenge for any pharaoh was to embody the lofty virtues of a god on earth, while still being fallible flesh and blood. Some managed that balancing act with justice and restraint, securing their people's prosperity and history's favor. Others succumbed to tyranny and caprice, leaving legacies forever tainted by cruelty. But whether revered or reviled, the pharaohs all shared an existence profoundly alien to our modern sensibilities, where the scope of one's actions held literally life and death stakes for an entire civilization. The pharaoh's day typically began at sunrise with a ceremonial cleansing by priests, followed by a grand procession out to the main temple for ritual offerings and worship. As a living god, this direct link to the divine was the pharaoh's most vital duty, necessary to maintain Ma'at. He would present statuettes of himself as offerings and libate wine, milk, and other precious liquids before the gods. Incense would be burned, prayers recited, and sacred magic enacted through liturgies and hymns. After the morning rituals, the pharaoh would attend to the business of state, receiving ministers' reports, settling legal cases, and issuing decrees on everything from irrigation projects to mining expeditions. He would also engage in more ceremonial duties as the day progressed, from officiating over agricultural festivals to commissioning monumental building works in his name. The pharaoh's workday was interspersed with breaks for meals, recreation, and rest. Meals were sumptuous affairs, with the pharaoh entitled to the choicest cuts of meat, the freshest produce from palace gardens, and delicacies like honey, figs, and dates. Servants would swat flies with long fans and offer water to wash. Recreation might include hunting, board games like Senet, or watching performances by musicians, dancers, and acrobats. Some pharaohs enjoyed swimming in palace pools, or taking a leisurely barge ride down the Nile. But even in leisure, there was little respite from ritual and responsibility. If the pharaoh opted for a pleasure cruise, it would be aboard a gilded barge hung with fluttering pennants, rowed by crews of servants as he relaxed under a canopy with his family and courtiers. If he retired to his harem for the evening, he was still expected to spend time with his great royal wife and produce heirs to secure the dynasty. The god-king's life was a goldfish bowl of relentless public scrutiny and expectation. While the pharaoh's magnificent surroundings and godlike status may seem enviable, it was in truth an intensely demanding and precarious existence. The smallest lapse in upholding Ma'at, whether ritual or moral, could unleash the furies of fate upon the entire land. He was like an acrobat crossing the Nile on a gossamer thread, poised between the earthly and the eternal. The burden of his office was an exhausting marathon of pageantry and weighty decisions, with the highest possible stakes in play. As the pharaoh finally retired for the evening, borne aloft on a gilded palanquin to his royal bedchamber, the day's exertions would take their toll. Falling into a dreamless sleep, he could at last slip the yoke of ritual and protocol, however briefly. In the morning, the great wheel would turn once more, and the demigod would re-emerge to greet the rising sun. But in those darkest hours before dawn, the pharaoh's chamber was a hushed sanctum of shadows and murmuring breaths, of stillness and quiet. Here, in night's forgiving embrace, he was merely human once more. Royal relationships and rivalries. The ancient Egyptian royal court was an intense environment of political intrigue, plays for power, and Machiavellian schemes. At its very top was the pharaoh himself, the center of gravity around which courtiers, officials, priests, and supplicants all revolved like planets orbiting the sun. But the pharaoh was far from being alone in his gilded cage. From incestuous marriages to murderous feuds, the intimate relationships and seething rivalries of the royal household were a constant source of drama that could rival any modern soap opera. The women who surrounded the pharaoh were some of the most influential and fascinating figures inside the palace. Foremost among them was the great royal wife, the queen who was meant to be the pharaoh's favorite consort and chief partner in ruling Egypt. Many queens held substantial power in their own right, with some, like Nefertiti and Hatshepsut, even eclipsing their own husband's authority. Nefertiti, the legendary beauty and great royal wife of the oddball pharaoh Akhenaten, may have reigned as a complete co-ruler beside him during the height of the Amarna period's religious upheaval. She vanished mysteriously from the record in Akhenaten's final years, but some tantalizing clues hint that she may have even succeeded him as the shrouded pharaoh Smenkhare. The jury is still out on that enigma. Hatshepsut's unprecedented power play was even more dramatic. As the royal daughter, wife, and mother of kings, Hatshepsut was uniquely poised to make her move when her young stepson Thutmose III inherited the throne. First serving as his regent, Hatshepsut soon assumed the full titles and regalia of a king in her own right, dropping the feminine endings from her royal name. For over 2 decades, Egypt had a female pharaoh in all but anatomy, dominating a time of immense prosperity and monumental building. Only after her death did Thutmose III emerge from the shadow of his formidable stepmother. But being the pharaoh's chief wife and queen was no guarantee of an easy life. In a polygamous palace, the queen always had to stay on her toes to maintain her influence and guard against rivals. One of the most infamous examples was the bitter war between Ramesses II's chief Queen Nefertari and the secondary wife Isetnofret, mother of the heir apparent. Court gossip gleefully chronicled how the two powerful women schemed ceaselessly against each other, using everything from lavish banquets to slanderous graffiti to sway the pharaoh's favor. The stakes in this Game of Thrones were immensely high, as queens vied to secure the succession for their own sons. Isetnofret ultimately triumphed, living to see her son Merneptah take the throne, but only after decades of ruthless intrigue. Such vicious rivalries between a pharaoh's wives were par for the palace course. Incest was another queasy quirk of royal marriages, seen as essential to safeguarding the sacred bloodline. Pharaohs often married their sisters, daughters, and even mothers in an attempt to keep the royal lineage as pure as possible. The Greek Ptolemaic dynasty took this to extremes, with the family tree knotting back on itself in a snarl of repeated incestuous unions. Cleopatra VII, the most famous Ptolemy of all, was actually the product of at least 3 generations of uninterrupted brother and sister marriages. Her family seemed to be competing to rack up the most convoluted incestuous relationships, with uncle-niece and even double-sibling matches thrown in for good measure. Ironically, all this incestuous inbreeding may have produced the genetic quirks and mental instability that ultimately doomed the dynasty. But incest in the royal family wasn't just a Ptolemaic phenomenon. It was an age-old custom dating back to the mythical origins of Egyptian kingship itself. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly embodiment of Horus, the divine son of Osiris and Isis, a brother and sister pair who also happened to be husband and wife. By emulating the gods' incestuous marriage, the pharaoh was upholding the cosmic order and literally following in the footsteps of the gods. Of course, such sibling marriages must have taken a heavy toll, both psychologically and genetically. The famous Tutankhamun was the sickly, short-lived product of an incestuous match between Akhenaten and his sister. His congenitally deformed foot and cleft palate point to the deleterious effects of inbreeding. But to the ancient Egyptians, purity of blood was far more important than genetic diversity. Incest was therefore not a taboo, but a sacred tradition. If rivalries between wives were vicious, those between potential heirs could be downright murderous. Primogeniture was not a hard and fast rule in ancient Egypt, meaning that any son, or even daughter, of the pharaoh could potentially make a play for the throne. This often led to ruthless power struggles and grim succession crises as rival princes schemed to eliminate their competitors. One notorious example was Amenemhat I, the founder of the powerful 12th dynasty. An advisor to the previous king, Amenemhat launched a successful coup and had himself crowned as the new pharaoh. But his reign was plagued by constant conspiracies and assassination attempts as rival factions jockeyed for power. His own harem even launched a shadowy plot against his life, creeping into the royal bedchamber with daggers drawn. Amenemhat only survived by the intervention of his loyal guards, fighting them off nearly naked. So shaken was Amenemhat by his brush with death that he took the unprecedented step of crowning his son Senusret I as co-regent during his own lifetime. By securing the succession early, Amenemhat aimed to stave off further intrigues and smooth the transfer of power. Realpolitik trumped tradition. Amenemhat's instructions to his son, a treatise on effective kingship, reflect his embattled cynicism. Be on your guard against all subordinates because you cannot be sure who is plotting against you. Perhaps the ultimate example of a royal rivalry turned deadly was the grim fall of Ramesses III, the last great pharaoh of the new kingdom. Court records paint a sordid picture of a geriatric pharaoh with a harem of hundreds, riven by factionalism as rival wives schemed to put their sons on the throne. One wife, Tai, hatched an audacious plot to assassinate Ramesses and crown her son Pentaweret in a coup. The conspiracy was uncovered at the 11th hour, but not before a bloody skirmish between guards loyal to Tai and those protecting the pharaoh. In the end, Ramesses's own throat was slit, likely by an assassin who wormed his way into the royal harem. The king lingered just long enough to appoint his designated heir and round up the ringleaders of the failed coup. In a grisly epilogue, the chief conspirators were forced to commit suicide, while the hapless Pentaweret was brutally executed and denied proper burial. Even in death, royal rivalries refused to rest. Such ruthless intrigues and lethal plays for power were all too common in the pharaoh's court, where the knives were perpetually out. Trust and loyalty were luxuries few could afford, with even family members potential enemies vying for position. Caught in this tangled web of shaky alliances and seething resentments, the pharaoh had to walk a razor's edge, vigilantly balancing factions while watching his own back. Heavy was the head that wore the double crown. Gods on earth, the pharaoh as divine ruler. More than just mere monarchs, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt were living gods, standing on the threshold between the earthly and the divine. Each pharaoh was considered the manifestation of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, and the offspring of the great sun god, reacting as the bridge between the celestial realm of the gods and the worldly domain of humans. The pharaoh had a crucial role in upholding Ma'at, the cosmic order, balance, and justice that kept chaos from overwhelming the world. This idea of divine kingship raised the pharaoh to a superhuman level and filled his every act with cosmic importance. From the instant of his coronation, when he took up the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the pharaoh was no longer entirely human and instead became a vessel for divine power. His word was absolute law, his edicts were the will of the gods, and his entire being was sacred. One of the most clear displays of the pharaoh's divinity was the sprawling temple complexes that were scattered across the land. These were not simply places for worship, they were the earthly homes of the gods, where the pharaoh conducted sacred ceremonies to preserve the vital connection between the human and divine worlds. The most magnificent of these temples, such as the Karnak complex in Thebes or the Luxor temple further south, were like cities in their own right, filled with priests, artisans, and servants, all of them committed to serving the pharaoh god. Inside these holy areas, the pharaoh would present offerings, speak incantations, and carry out complex rituals to satisfy the gods and guarantee the continuous stream of divine blessings. The most critical of these rites was the daily regeneration of the sun, in which the pharaoh would symbolically fuse with the sun god Re to be reborn every single morning. By taking part in this eternal cycle of death and rebirth, the pharaoh was helping to maintain the very structure of the universe. But the pharaoh's divine status was not just a religious idea, it also had extensive consequences for Egyptian society and politics. As a living god, the pharaoh held absolute power over his subjects. His word was law, and his orders were never to be challenged. Following the pharaoh was the same as being pious, and rising up against him was equivalent to a sacrilegious act. This godlike power could be intoxicating, and some pharaohs took their divine status to disturbing extremes. Perhaps the most infamous case was Amenhotep IV, more widely known as Akhenaten, who overturned centuries of Egyptian religious custom by declaring the sun disk Aten as the one true god and positioning himself as its only prophet. In a wave of religious passion, Akhenaten commanded that the names and figures of other gods be destroyed. He shut their temples, and even relocated the capital to a secluded desert location he named Akhetaten, or the horizon of the Aten. While Akhenaten's religious revolution was brief, it demonstrated the incredible power and influence a pharaoh could exercise as a divine sovereign. The reality that he could unilaterally overthrow the entire assembly of Egyptian gods and enforce a new state religion through pure force of will speaks volumes about the pharaoh's god-like authority. But even in less chaotic periods, the pharaoh's divinity separated him from the rest of Egyptian society. He was a distant, awe-inspiring figure, seldom seen in public except for carefully stage-managed events. His subjects came before him with a mix of awe and fear, bowing down in his presence and looking away from his divine glow. Even his own courtiers and ministers had to act with caution, lest they cross a line and provoke his godly anger. In a very true sense, the pharaoh was the central pillar that supported the entire structure of ancient Egyptian civilization. As long as he carried out his divine responsibilities and preserved Ma'at, the cosmic order, everything was fine. But if he stumbled or was unsuccessful in his duties, it could mean catastrophe for the entire country. A weak or ineffective pharaoh could bring about chaos, starvation, and invasion, while a despotic or irreverent one risked angering the gods and inviting divine punishment. It is no surprise, then, that the Egyptians dedicated so much time, work, and wealth to honoring and celebrating their pharaohs. The enormous statues, tall obelisks, and magnificent tomb complexes were all proof of the pharaoh's superhuman rank and lasting legacy. They were also a method of strengthening his divine authority and affirming his critical role in the cosmic system. But as we will explore in the next section, this obsession with the pharaoh's divinity peaked in the final place one would ever imagine: the tomb. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end for a pharaoh, but simply a shift to an even more revered state of existence. And they would go to unbelievable, even horrifying, measures to make sure their divine ruler had all he would need for that journey. The obsession with eternity. The flickering torchlight throws a strange glow on the rough-hewn walls of the tomb, as if the shadows themselves are living things, heavy with the weight of past ages. The air here is thick with the sharp smell of incense and the damp scent of death, a sickly perfume that sticks in the nostrils and at the back of the throat. Deeper and deeper we go, into the very core of the earth, tracing the steps of the pharaoh on his last voyage into the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not a thing to be dreaded, but was instead a gateway to a new and magnificent existence. They were convinced that life on earth was only a short introduction to an eternal next life, where the departed would live in a paradise with the gods, celebrating and enjoying themselves for all time. But to reach this blessed condition, a person had to be correctly prepared, both in spirit and in body. And no one was more prepared for the afterlife than the pharaohs. From the day they claimed the throne, they started preparing for their own eventual death with a single-minded intensity that was almost obsessive. Huge amounts of resources were dedicated to the building of their tombs and mortuary temples, which were true cities of the dead that would function as their everlasting homes. The most famous of these, of course, are the great pyramids that dominate the Giza Plateau. These incredible structures, erected during the Old Kingdom, were much more than just tombs. They were cosmic machines built to send the pharaoh's soul into the heavens, so it could take its place among the stars. The pyramid's smooth, angled faces were intended to symbolize the primordial hill of creation, while its exact alignment with the cardinal directions reflected the order and balance of the universe itself. But even more crucial than the tomb itself was the intricate process of readying the pharaoh's body for the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians were convinced that the physical body was just as significant as the spiritual self, and that these two parts had to be kept together for all eternity. And so, through the holy rites of mummification, the pharaoh's dead body was changed from a lifeless shell into a vessel for immortality. For 70 days, the body was dried out and dehydrated with natron salt, its internal organs taken out and carefully stored in canopic jars. Then, in a complex ceremony that could last for weeks, the mummy was anointed with sacred oils, wrapped in innumerable layers of linen cloth, and decorated with protective amulets and jewelry. The face was frequently covered with a life-like mask of gold and precious stones, a perfect portrait of the pharaoh in all of his divine splendor. But the pharaoh's voyage was still far from complete. Once the mummy was ready, it had to be moved to the tomb in a great funerary parade, with priests chanting hymns and spells to repel evil spirits. The sarcophagus was then gently placed into the burial chamber, surrounded by all of the grave goods the pharaoh would require in the afterlife: furniture, clothing, jewelry, even food and drink to sustain him on his eternal trip. And this is where the pharaoh's preparations took a much darker and more disturbing direction. For some rulers, it was not enough to be interred with simple objects. They demanded to be joined by their actual living servants, ready to cater to their every need in the hereafter. These unfortunate souls, called retainers, were often the pharaoh's most devoted courtiers and officials, hand-picked to serve him in death just as they had in life. The practice of human sacrifice was not rare in the early dynasties of ancient Egypt, especially during the First Dynasty. Archaeological finds from this era show numerous secondary burials surrounding the tombs of pharaohs like Hor-Aha and Jur, containing the bodies of servants, bodyguards, and even women and dwarves who were thought to possess special powers. One of the most chilling examples comes from the tomb of King Jur at Abydos, where the remains of over 300 individuals were discovered buried in orderly rows, like a macabre honor guard flanking the pharaoh's final resting place. Many of the bodies showed evidence of strangulation or blunt force trauma, indicating that they had been intentionally killed to accompany their ruler into the afterlife. But perhaps even more unsettling than the human sacrifices were the animal ones. Countless mummified cats, dogs, monkeys, and even lions have been discovered in Egyptian tombs, often lavishly wrapped and adorned like miniature pharaohs themselves. These beloved pets were believed to offer companionship and protection for their masters in the afterlife, a consolation prize of sorts for an eternity spent in the darkness. And then there were the stranger grave goods, like the millions of human hair wigs found in some tombs. These intricate hairpieces, crafted from the shorn locks of courtiers and slaves, were intended to guarantee that the pharaoh always had a fresh hairstyle, even in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians were convinced that hair held magical properties, and that a full, luxurious wig was a symbol of vitality and power. But as the centuries went on, the custom of human sacrifice slowly fell out of fashion. By the era of the New Kingdom, the notion of killing servants to attend to the pharaoh in the afterlife was viewed as barbaric and uncivilized. Instead, the Egyptians adopted more symbolic practices, like putting shabty figurines in the tomb that would magically come to life and carry out menial chores for the deceased. Yet even as the physical sacrifices stopped, the psychological impact of the pharaoh's obsession with the afterlife continued. The immense resources and labor invested into their tombs and mortuary cults drained wealth and energy from the living, while the concept of a ruler who could demand loyalty even after death cast a long shadow over Egyptian society. And in the end, for all their detailed plans and safeguards, the pharaohs could not avoid the destruction of time and tomb raiders. Many of their carefully built resting places were broken into and desecrated over the millennia, their mummies and burial goods scattered to the winds. In a bitter twist of fate, The very actions they took to guarantee their immortality ultimately became their undoing. But even in death, the pharaohs continue to both fascinate and horrify us in equal measure. Their mummies, with their uncanny, lifelike expressions and an aura of ancient power, have become the material of legend and popular culture. And as we gaze into their tombs and sarcophagi, we cannot help but feel a tremor of both awe and revulsion at the extremes they went to in their pursuit of eternal life. For the pharaohs, death was not the final stop, but merely the start of a new and magnificent existence. But as we have seen, that existence came at a truly terrible price, calculated in human lives and labors. And in the end, perhaps the most disturbing thing about the pharaohs' afterlife obsession is not what it reveals about them, but what it reveals about us, and our own deeply rooted fears and fascinations with the great unknown. In a certain sense, the pharaohs did obtain their dream of immortality, not only through their complex tombs and sacred mummification rites, but through the permanent brand they left on the human imagination. From the boy King Tutankhamun to the mighty warrior Ramesses II to the legendary beauty Cleopatra, the pharaohs continue to stand tall in our collective awareness, their sagas recounted in countless books, films, and documentaries. They have become much more than historical personalities. They have become mythic archetypes, representing timeless ideas of power, ambition, love, and death. In the end, this is perhaps the pharaohs' truest legacy, not the treasure-filled tombs or awe-inspiring pyramids they left in their wake, but the manner in which they have influenced our own understanding of what it means to be human. Through their triumphs and their failures, their brilliance and their brutality, they serve as a mirror for the heights and depths we are all capable of, the unending human struggle to make our mark on the world while wrestling with our own mortality. So, the next time you see a depiction of a pharaoh, whether it is the iconic death mask of Tutankhamun or a faded hieroglyph etched into an ancient temple wall, take a moment to consider the complex, fascinating, and frequently disturbing world they once commanded. And remember that even the most powerful among us are finally subject to the same essential questions and challenges that have always defined the human experience for millennia. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lives of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. I hope you found it as enlightening and captivating as I have. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the most fascinating chapters of human history, ones that just might change the way you think about your own place in the grand sweep of time. Until next time.